Good evening, and welcome to another Monday Night Live at Cafe. We're gonna go with that. Awesome. Wow, awesome. Who knew? That's awesome. Okay, so we're gonna cut out a lot of the pre-event housekeeping that I call it. We're gonna launch in a moment. We're gonna launch into an interview with Frankie G. We have with us Frankie G tonight, Frank Giglio, and if any of you haven't seen it before, I'm just going to do a little embarrassment to Frankie now. He was featured on Raw Food magazine. I can't remember, June 2009. June 2009. I was going to call this 2009. The knife photo, the raw pinup of this last summer.
Unfortunately, that was the last one that came out. So.
I know, it was the first one I actually got an article in too. If you turn to the very last page, is this it? Yeah, look. Of course, I'm the colon person. I don't get anything groovy like knives. I'm like the psychedelic colon article. So tonight, we're going to do this a little bit in an interview format, is what Frankie requested. And his topic is going localvore, tuning into the seasons. And I'm going to embarrass you by reading my intro.
Okay.
Okay. So here's my intro to Frank Giglio. Frank Giglio, we were laughing about how stiff we all are on camera. So we're like doing this video. Frank Giglio is a classically trained chef. No, okay. Frank Giglio is a classically trained chef from New England, from the New England Culinary Institute, and a graduate of the Institute for Integrative Nutrition in New York City. Since the age of 15, Frank has fully immersed himself into the culinary world. Frank's experience is a culmination of working throughout the country, from remote lodges in Alaska, the high desert of Arizona, as well as Colorado and Boston. Last year, travels outside of the country brought Frank to Canada as well as Ireland, where he taught a series of raw food-based workshops. So we've got a classically trained chef who went raw, and he's been teaching that, and now he's going localvore. And we'll explain what that is. So after years of dogmatic food eating beliefs, Frank has found truth and passion in utilizing and discovering the localvore lifestyle. To him, this means consuming the highest quality foods found in his neck of the woods. So, everybody, this is Frank Giglio, who's traveled quite a ways to get here. Let's give him another welcome.
Well, thank you all for coming. And just a quick, before we get into anything else, Jessica Prentice, who wrote a book that I keep forgetting, The Full Moon Feast, she coined the phrase localvore at a San Francisco, I think it was like the World Environmental Day in 2005. So she's a San Francisco native, and she coined that phrase about 5 years ago. So that's where that comes from. And Full Moon Feast is a great book that basically starts talking about building a relationship with the earth and through food. So that's something to check out, Jessica Prentice.
Jessica Prentice.
Yep.
Did you read that 5 years ago or just recently?
I have not, and I don't even actually have it. I was just reading her stuff online.
We'll edit that out. Okay.
It's on the Amazon book list.
So Frank, just start by telling people a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up, and when did you get interested in food?
Okay.
How did that happen for you?
Well, I grew up in Connecticut and lived there for the first 18, 19 years of my life, and I've come back since. But I grew up on the shoreline of Connecticut, just outside of New Haven, and was never really into food as a youth, and was basically lived on the standard American meat, or standard American Italian diet of meat and pasta and Fruit Loops and Cocoa Pebbles. But really, there was no consciousness around food through myself nor my family, through my entire upbringing. It was just something you just eat at 3 times a day because that's what you do, and there was no eat this because it's good for you, just eat because that's what's on the table. And I know growing up through high school, I don't think I know one vegetarian, and it was just not even something that was in my mindset.
Well, you were telling me earlier today, what vegetables did you eat as a kid?
As a kid, I pretty much ate raw carrots, cucumbers, and black olives and cooked tomatoes, but not raw tomatoes. And it was like pasta like 3 times a week. But yeah, it was just not something that was readily consumed. Some iceberg lettuce as well, but that was about it.
So what happened?
And then, well, when I was 15, it was time to get a job, and my dad said, well, you'll be 16 in a year, you'll get your car, so you better start working. And so I instantly just took a job at a retirement home and started washing dishes. But was instantly excited with the way the food was being prepared, even though it was a retirement home and it wasn't the most exciting food in the world, but I was just like, this crazy Italian guy was making food, and it was like totally exciting. And I just absolutely loved it. And I was like, I want to help. Can I make this? Can I do this? And I just started like jumping in and helping out. And then I think after a year, I moved on and got another job at a big time typical New England seafood restaurant, and just worked my way up from breading fish to frying the fish to prepping the dishes to working the grill and learning all the ways of working in a restaurant. And then decided to go to culinary school. And at that time, wasn't really ready for college, and I was like, let me go with what I know. And
so how old were you at this point?
I graduated high school in 19. So I went to the New England Culinary Institute up in Vermont. And they're a very unique school because you do 6 months in school, then you do a 6-month apprenticeship, and then you go back and do another 6 months, and then another 6-month apprenticeship. And those 2 apprenticeships, you get to choose anywhere in the world you want to go, as long as you could get the job and get a place to stay. And so the first one, I actually went to Portland, Oregon, and worked at the Heathman Hotel. And that's a world-renowned historical small hotel under a French master chef who called me Coco and stood in front of me and yelled and did the typical things that a French chef would do. And so I learned what I needed to learn, and then went back to school, and then went and did another apprenticeship in Boston at a place called Olives. That was another famed chef who now owns about 15 restaurants across the world. He's on the Queen Mary and in the Bellagio and in airports, and has his own pots and pans and books and all that stuff. So I've really got a huge mix of all sorts of different cuisines and different ways of preparing food. And then continued my way through dessert shops and health food stores, and did a whole big mix of food until about 4 years ago this week, I met David Wolf in California.
You just were like walking down the street and you're like, hey, that guy's groovy, because you wouldn't have known who he was.
No.
Or you were at a raw retreat, or...
I was at my boss, I was working at a health food store at the time, and my boss sent me to the Expo West in Anaheim. And so I went there, and I knew who David Wolf was. I was kind of intrigued. At the store, I used to, was always looking for new ideas, so I'd look into macrobiotics, so I'd buy a macrobiotic book, and then I'd start kind of experimenting on myself, and then start making the recipes. And I did the same. I had Giuliano's book, and that was like, I'm like, I don't want to turn out like this guy, but his diet's, the food's pretty cool. And so I went to Anaheim, and I knew David would be there, or at least Sun Food would be there. And I walked up to the booth, and here's this guy, and he had this huge chunk of cacao butter. And at the time, I had no idea what cacao butter was, and he was like rubbing it all over his face. And he like handed it to me and said, just give this to your girlfriend and she'll never leave you. And I put it in my pocket, and it actually like melted, because it was, it melts. And I got his Sun Food Diet book, and I read it within like a week, and just changed my entire life within pretty much a day.
Well, so just to help me do the math,
okay.
After the 2 years of classical training and apprenticing, how many years was that before you ran into David somewhere?
It was about 4 years, 4 or 5 years, I believe.
And so you get turned on to raw foods. Did you just embrace it immediately? Or?
Yeah, and not like a full-on 100%, this is the only way, but at the time I was still at the health food store and making vegetarian and vegan